my name's Bridget Anderson. I'm Director of Migration Mobilities Bristol, which is a specialist research institute at the University of Bristol.
Lovely, thanks. So as you know, our project is about the question of solidarities. And solidarity is a word that we hear all the time. So it's used in everyday conversations, it's used in media coverage, it's used in academic work, but often with quite a sort of shifting or implicit meanings. And so I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit about how you conceptualize solidarity, or what this concept signifies to you.
So I suppose for me, solidarity is in some ways an ambivalent term, because I think that solidarity suggests support that is not about common interests. So I suppose my first port of call when looking for political relationships is to look for shared interests, which are often obfuscated. And most particularly in the work that I do, I'm interested in interests that are shared between migrants and citizens, but that are obscured by the categories of migrant and citizen. So that's why I say that I'm ambivalent about solidarity, because I think that solidarity is more often what's called upon in thinking about, say, migrants and citizens, or refugees and citizens, that we need to show solidarity rather than that we need to recognise common interests. However, I think the point is that there are, in many cases, there aren't necessarily common interests. Or in order to uncover those common interests, you have to take solidarity as a starting point, because the common interests might not easily be apparent. As I say, they're often, in fact, deliberately obfuscated. So I suppose I see solidarity as a common, as often as a very good starting point for further enriching and developing political and social relationships. I think because also it denotes a kind of equality, that there is a sort of equal, there is equality between partners. Because I think solidarity has to go both ways. So again, that's why sometimes in some uses of the term solidarity, I'm kind of like, well, so if citizens are showing solidarity with refugees, how do refugees show solidarity with citizens? I mean, I think they do, but that's much less commonly kind of called upon. So again, I think it invites us to think about that. So I think that the kind of, as you say, the lack of the fact that the term or the meaning isn't fixed is an opportunity. I think it can be used to open up those sorts of conversations. I think one area where you can see that solidarity is used quite scarily in some ways, I think, to close down conversations is in the way that it's used in the European Union. When there are calls for, when solidarity is sort of waved about as a value of the European Union, and you think like, oh, that sounds good. And then you realize, oh, no, they mean solidarity between member states, which is actually a very different kind of relation, I think, than the relation in which that's usually signaled by the term as used sort of in everyday parlance.
Super, thanks very much. And I think in many ways, what you're saying links very nicely to the next question that I was going to ask you. I mean, one of the things we've done for this project is we've quite self-consciously use the plural of solidarity. So the project itself is called Solidarities. And I think in part, maybe it's getting at some of these ambivalences or multiplicity of meanings in the way that the term is evoked. I think you've said a little bit already, but I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you see as the sort of significance of thinking solidarities in this plural form, especially in this research project where we're looking at how migrant deservingness is negotiated.
How's a plural? Yeah. Well, I suppose the plural form is, so firstly, it invites the question, well, why are you using the plural form? Which is good because you're inviting the question. And yes, I think exactly that it demonstrates there are multiple ways of being in solidarity with each other, but that also it's something that isn't fixed, it changes. I think one of the problem with the words, with the singular solidarity, is that it sounds so solid, whereas actually solidarities is not solid. It's a kind of, it suggests a more processual kind of, and sort of more processual sort of relationship. Yes, so I definitely think it's preferable. I think it's also, yes, it's more nuanced, and I think kind of, you know, I wonder whether in the course of the project, in the same way that, you know, people moved from talking about integration and then integration as a two-way process, I'm wondering whether we'll move to, and then integration as a multi-way process. I wonder whether we'll move to thinking about solidarities as a multivalenced, really.
Right. Super. Thank you for that. That gives me lots to think about already about the kind of multivalence of solidarities. Moving sort of more specifically into your own work, one of the things that I find really insightful and inspiring in your work is your discussion about community of value. And some of the work you've done to demonstrate the ways in which those who are positioned as non-citizens, so migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, so non-citizens or failed citizens are excluded from value in various ways. Can you say a little bit about the sorts of insights, questions, provocations, this notion of community of value, or the empirical work you've done around this notion, what that might kind of prompt us to think about as we are investigating solidarities or negotiations of deservingness?
Yeah, you did ask about provocations. So, I mean, I think, so I suppose the community, so I'm interested in the community of value. Sometimes I think the community of value stands in for the nation, for a certain idea of what constitutes the nation, the kinds of people that are part of the nation, which is actually a fantasy, you know. So I think the ways you saw some of this with the debates around the recent Jamaican deportation flight, where you had where people who were, you know, long-time residents, some of them from children, were being threatened with deportation, and indeed some of them were deported as on the basis of criminality to Jamaica, despite lack of connection and family there, and often family in the UK. And you heard politicians talking about, you know, how these people, you know, how these people are, you know, they always choose violent crimes, you know, rape and murder, even though, of course, most people, those are not the crimes that most people commit and are deported for, and how, you know, these people are stalking our streets as if no British person has ever raped or murdered anyone, and indeed as if no British person is a criminal. I mean, I use the word criminal in inverted commas. and scare quotes. So I think the figure of the person who has committed a crime, the criminal, is a really interesting one to kind of engage with in terms of migration. And you actually see people actively doing that by saying, you know, refugees are not criminals. Illegal immigrants are not criminals. Sort of inviting the question, well, so what if they are? And many times, what's wrong with being a criminal? You know, I'm not saying what's wrong with being a rapist or a murderer, but, you know, there are many acts that are criminalized. I mean, most obviously supporting undocumented migrants, which one might not think actually are morally heinous. So, so then I think what we see when we then kind of unpack some of these claims about, you know, for example, not being a criminal, or for example, these newcomers who are undocumented from our home country are not like us. They, you know, we were hardworking, and now these people are just coming in and spoiling it for the rest of us. So there's lots of ways in which I think people who are what in my work I've called tolerated citizens, so people who really are clinging on to deservingness slightly by their fingertips, are actually the ones who then have to call upon the community of value and assert their membership in the community of value, and thereby draw the boundary between themselves and the undeserving particularly sharply. So, you know, it's easy for me to ask the question, what's wrong with being a criminal? Because I'm a professor. And I'm British. It's not so easy for many other people to ask the question, what's wrong with being a criminal? Just to give an example. So, so in a way, I think that shows both, you know, both the pressures that tolerated citizens are under in order to show that they are indeed deserving. And here I think, you know, we can enter into conversations about fears of migrants and migrants, you know, scrounging off the welfare state and those sorts of questions, and how perhaps people who are themselves feeling are often treated as not deserving of the right to social assistance, thereby police the boundaries. I'm worthy of it, but this other person is not, whether it's because they're a single mother or because they're a migrant or whatever that reason. So I think on the one hand, it shows that we perhaps need to understand that position and how it can be worked with. But then also, I think perhaps, you know, for the people that are firmly ensconced in the community of value, I think it also then demands that we take that position, the responsibilities that come with that position, seriously and speak out, while also recognizing that we can't guarantee that we're always going to be secure, you know. And I think that you can see that in the sorts of claims about do-gooders, do-gooding lawyers. I'm sure that I'm probably a do-gooding academic that come from, you know, from the mouths of governments. So I think we're at a time when the community of value is at once being destabilized and reinforced. And so that's one reason why it's a very important project that we're all involved with.